I want to remind you that you're not a project. You're not something that needs fixing because you're not broken. And the reason why I want to talk about this today is because it's really easy when we're doing this inner work, personal development, inner growth, whatever you want to call it. It's really easy to kind of look at it and go, oh God, I have all this work to do. Or I still have more work to do. Or I still haven't done this. It can get a little bit of that air of you're a project that needs fixing and needs completing. And the way that I like to look at this is you're just building a relationship with yourself. You're building a healthy relationship with yourself. And so I don't necessarily give step 1, step 2, step 3 because it's so individual and unique. Sometimes I'm afraid that I'm a little bit too vague on these podcasts, and I'd actually like to do some more kind of like live sessions as a podcast so people can really see it in action. Because when I'm in front of, what someone is going through or they have a particular question, then I can address that. But it's very unique. There's no one size fits all. And ultimately, it's really understanding in what ways do we need to be more kind with ourselves, more accepting with ourselves. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into this and shift the perspective maybe that can help liberate you so that you're not looking at yourself as a project or something that needs fixing because you're broken. And that might sound like, yeah, okay, whatever, that's a no-brainer. But actually, I really see it so often in my practice that people will say, what's wrong with me? How do I get rid of this? Can you fix this for me? And if you're going in with that attitude, it makes the journey much harder. And so it's really a reframe. The reframe is so important because that's what's going to put you on the right path. Otherwise, you might find yourself going in circles. So let's dive in. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So maybe the reason why we sometimes relate to ourselves as projects is, one, we're living in a society that really likes to check things off the list and have projects to complete because it gives us a sense of accomplishment and therefore validation, right? There's nothing wrong with that per se, but when you're doing that with your own humanity, it can be quite harsh because it lends itself to being very self-critical and judgmental. I'd also argue that maybe traditional therapy, that in many ways, I'm not saying all therapy, but some therapies, in my opinion, I think are a little bit outdated because they can get stuck in looking at, well, what's the problem? Right? This is the problem of your childhood. This is the problem of your personality. And the analysis itself can get so heavy because you're just looking at all of the things that are essentially quote unquote wrong, or the obstacle or the challenge. And again, if you get stuck in that, it can be really debilitating and it can keep you in a loop. You can just basically live and reenact the story, or maybe have an understanding of what your story is, but there's no kind of forward motion. There's no healing, actually. And my sense is that lends itself to feeling like, yeah, we're projects. We're projects that take 15, 20 years to try and resolve and figure out, and maybe then not even, right? So the reframe for me is to look at it just as you would. Hopefully, maybe not everyone does. Some people are happy to just go into relationships and try to coast, on autopilot. But just as you would want to make any relationship harmonious, loving, kind, fun, playful, passionate, why would we not want to do that with ourselves? Right? Sometimes it's easier to focus on something externally because we have something to relate to, right? Whereas what's happening inside, there might be a kind of ambiguity because we can't point to it. It's a feeling. Once you start to build self-awareness, you can actually point to it. You can go, oh, this part of me feels like this, or this emotion, or this sensation, or you build a language around your personality, your experience, the feelings and sensations in your body. You have words to be able to communicate it. And that's actually, on a side note, a really important part of this process. And it really helps people in relationship, because if you don't know how to communicate, if you don't know how, Like, what is actually going on within you? So that if you don't understand the language of your body and being, how are you going to be able to communicate that to somebody else? Right? And actually, I remember hearing that it's really hard from a medical perspective if you have a patient that can't speak, can't communicate. It's really hard for them to actually know what's going on in their body to diagnose anything. So it just shows you that communication is so important, and verbal communication is a very small portion. I'm not saying that it's all down to verbal communication, because there's so much in body language, in our actions, energetically, tone, right? All of these things. But it's a really important skill, and I think it can make or break relationships. But everything starts within us, right? So how are we communicating with ourselves, and how are we really ultimately understanding ourselves? I'm going to drop it in again that whatever you feel challenged by, or that you're seeking or yearning to receive from the outside, that often indicates what it is that you're needing to give to yourself on the inside. So if you feel misunderstood by people, the first question I would ask you is, in what ways are you not understanding yourself? The second step might be you're understanding yourself, but you haven't learned yet how to communicate that understanding, one, and then communicate in a way that that person can hear it. See, this is another thing around communication, is that it's great to be like, well, I want to express myself. I want to communicate in the way that feels right for me, because I want to express myself and be free in my expression, be authentic in my expression. Absolutely. But if you say it in a way that that person can't hear or understand it, you're not even going to get what you need, because your point doesn't get across. Now, that's complex. And obviously, if I'm working, especially with a couple, it's trying to understand each other's language and the way that they communicate, and everything that comes underneath, resides underneath the communication. Unmet needs, desires, insecurities, fears, wounds, traumas, right? All of that. And this is why it would be great to do a live session, so that you can have a kind of a live experience of it, to be able to observe it. So, but coming back to, you are not a project. You're not broken. There's nothing to fix. There's just nothing wrong with you. We've got to look at ourselves from a human eye, which is, we are innately vulnerable beings, and that doesn't equate weakness. I certainly don't have that definition of vulnerability as weakness, but we are, human. So we have different sensitivities, and some people are more emotional than others. Some people are more anxious than others. Some people are more, introverted. Some people are more extroverted. We're color. We're a rainbow of different colors, But really, at the core of it, we all have very similar, human experiences and basic fundamental needs. So to reframe that you are not a project, there's nothing wrong with you. This shouldn't be like, oh my God, hard work that I have to finish this project by this date, this deadline. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny that it's called deadline, because it's like, well, maybe the project isn't finished until we're dead, and actually even beyond then, right? If you believe in your soul coming back, there is no end. It's infinite. It's a lifelong, eternal journey. But you don't have to look at it as like a constant Mount Everest of a climb. This is an experience. And sometimes you can surf the wave and it feels really great. And sometimes you get, bashed up a little bit, and that's okay. That's part of it. So cultivating a good relationship with yourself. When I talk about self-love, when I talk about self-acceptance, sometimes these things can feel really abstract, especially if we weren't modeled them when we were younger, or we weren't, our basic needs didn't feel met, or however we decided to cope was maybe to isolate and pull ourselves apart and separate from the tribe. I'm just going to use that as the metaphor. Sometimes it can feel really abstract, because you feel like you're just kind of reaching out in the darkness going, well, what the hell is this? I don't fucking know what self-love is, or even self-acceptance for some. That can be really a challenge. So I want to keep that in mind and go back to, well, how would you want to be treated by a partner? And how would you want to show up for them? Because again, sometimes we need that like external reflection or something to relate to that's outside of us, just to remind us that actually we're doing the same exact thing within us. And I can say, like, just be more kind to yourself. And you might be like, yeah, I'm fine. I treat myself, well. But actually, if you really pay attention, sometimes our self-criticism can be so subtle and so insidious. It could be the way that you speak to yourself internally when you're putting on your clothes. What are the comments that you make about your body? What are the comments that you make when you look at yourself in the mirror? What are the comments that you make when you are having a down day? What are the comments that you make when you feel, this is getting bigger, when you feel like, well, shit, I'm not at the place in my life that I want it to be, right? How we communicate with ourselves is essential. It's like one of the main ingredients of whether we're going to feel at peace. And if you've listened to me before, you'll hear that I say that a lot. I don't use the word happiness. I use the word peace, because we can be sad or down or frustrated or grieving, which I want to talk about that in a second, and still feel at peace within ourselves because we're not fighting ourselves. Happiness is an emotion, it's a lovely one. It's super enjoyable, but we kind of measure ourselves or place ourselves in a kind of juxtaposition or comparison that it's like, well, I should be happy all the time. It's a lovely thing to be happy, but actually being at peace is far more important because it will allow you to be more resilient as you move through the inevitable ups and downs of life. So the reason why I wanted to just point out grief is because our society is totally shit at it. I'm just going to be really blunt. We're really shit at it. And because we don't have any ritual, we don't have community or tribe, we don't have the culture that creates the net that says, I'm going to hold you in this. It says, no, get your shit together and keep moving on. Are you fine today? Are you feeling better? No, some people are grieving. And I know a lot of people that are in grief right now because there's some hard shit going on in the world. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. There's some hard truths that people are facing. And there's the physical consequence of that. And it's painful. And we don't have a society that has any kind of support network for that. And if anything, actually, if you grieve a little too long or, if you feel down a little too long, then it's like, well, it goes back to, well, what's wrong with you? Well, you need fixing, right? And so there comes the project. If we were to just accept or understand or know that our human experience ebbs and flows, and I've used this analogy probably a very long time ago on this. Imagine your emotions as a color wheel. They're just different colors. You might prefer one color to another, but one isn't better than the other. They're just simply different shades, right? And our human experience and our human emotions are no different, other than they just feel challenging. I would also beg to say, we just judge certain emotions as worse than others because we don't like them, because we're uncomfortable, because we've kind of gotten a little bit lazy. It's really easy to just go, you know what, I'm going to suppress that. I'm going to deny that. I'm going to take a pill for that. I'm going to watch TV for that. I'm going to eat for that. I'm going to, there again, I think there's this, I could talk all about rite of passage and how we've really lost that in our culture and how important those things were to help us transition into different parts of our life, and to understand that sometimes transition is hard. It's confusing because we don't know. We're building the bridge. We're trying to get from one bank of the river to the other side, and we're building with the bricks along the way to get us there. But we've kind of grown up in a culture that says, well, one step and you should just be there, or it shouldn't be hard. Everything should be super comfortable. It's really, it's sad because it makes our life, I think in some ways, the irony is the more comfortable things have appeared, the worse we are at dealing with the challenges because we're trying to eradicate them, or we're trying to just cover up the symptom. A lot of modern medicine, you could say, is just cover up the symptom. It's not going to the core of the problem. I put my hand up with that. I get migraines all the time. When the pain gets too hard, I end up taking a painkiller. Is that resolving my migraines? Absolutely not. It's resolving the symptom. But I really need to look at, well, where is this coming from? Is it hormonal? Is it physical structure? Is it lifestyle? Is it, you know what I mean? So we need to dig a little bit deeper. It's no different with our inner emotional world. Again, it's more ambiguous because we can't point to the pain and go, ouch, I have a migraine, ouch, they broke their foot, whatever. It feels more ambiguous when it's in the realm of emotions. But I would say they're no different because everything is holistic anyway. So coming back to You Are Not a Project. Just on a side note, as I chuckled, we really got to learn to take ourselves a lot less seriously. I'm learning that too. I'm really learning that too. And I think that helps to take away from the oh my God, this is such a project and hard work and being human is hard and life is hard. And sometimes we really need to learn to laugh at and with ourselves. I think that is a really important part of this process is be kind, be patient, but also have a sense of humor, So if you're not a project and this is about cultivating a good relationship with yourself, what would be the most kind, loving thing that you could do when something is challenging? My first response to that is just stay. Just stay with yourself. Don't have the knee-jerk reaction to have a statement about what that means or that you should be different, or it's because this part of you is wrong, or because, this happens to you all the time. All of those things go into the story of your belief systems. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm the victim. Life, good things happen to other people. It doesn't happen for me. Other people get love. Other people get success. Other people have money. Other people, do you see what I mean? The comparison is totally useless. It's the unnecessary suffering, as you've heard me talk about. So the first thing I recommend is just stay. Just stay with sheer presence. And I know that that's not easy because that is a very new habit that we're not used to because we go to distraction, right? We're not used to staying. It can be deeply uncomfortable. But just try and stay. Breath is a great way of helping us stay in the present moment. If you don't know what you need, if you don't know how to give yourself that need, really the step before that is to ask, if you had a child, if you had your partner, if you had a family member, a friend, your best friend, and something was going on with them, what would you do? Hey, how are you? How can I help you? What do you need? Do you need anything? Right? Again, what we do with the external, with someone else, why would we not do that with ourselves? But we don't often do that. If something comes up, we'll be why the fuck did I react that way? Why am I feeling like this? I shouldn't be feeling like that. We don't say, hey, Corinne, how are you doing right now? How can I help you? What do you need? Do you need anything? Can I get you a cup of tea? Do you need to go lie down and rest? We don't do that with ourselves. Part of it, again, we're not taught. Part of it is we don't stay long enough in presence to be able to actually listen to ourselves. We kind of go into the knee-jerk reaction, the unconscious reaction to just go into judgment and self-criticism. But I also think another part of it is, are we functioning from the wounded child, or are we functioning as an adult that can self-soothe and self-nurture? If the inner child is still playing out that wound where they're looking for some external thing, person, authority even, to make them feel better, to make them feel safe, to make them feel validated, to make them feel nurtured, to make them feel whole, it's going to be really hard to self-soothe because you're looking for the soothing outside of yourself. And I get it. If the child didn't receive that, there's a wound there. And that's why going in and doing this work is so important. But again, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you and that you're a project and something needs to be fixed because you're broken. It just means welcome to being human. We all have this journey. The story might vary, but we all have this journey. And so, really the first point of reference, if you haven't done that work yet, is to tend to the inner child and to recognize, as I've said many times, we want to create the space between the essence of who we are and these parts of us so that we can see the parts of ourselves. You know, we can pull them apart so that we're not so over-identified. And then we're just like in the quagmire of our suffering and our wounding and our projections and our reactions and our triggers and all of these things. We want to have the space so that we can observe and witness and learn, learn about these parts of ourselves. Oh, what does this part of me need? What does that part of me need? Okay, when that part feels like that, this is what I can give it so that it feels better. And then eventually where this work takes us is we integrate these parts of ourselves into the greater whole, the greater being that we truly are. And going back to the container, love is the container, we can hold all of these parts and then we don't have to feel so like schizophrenic sometimes, you know what I mean? So ultimately, it's about inclusion. It's about embracing. So if you have any dialogue in your mind that says, I don't like this part of me, I hate this part of me, I want to get rid of this part of me, how do I fix this part of me, I want you to fix this part of me, you need to turn it around and you need to actually walk towards it with open arms and bring it in to your heart and love it. That is the ultimate alchemist. I had a really strong experience of this in my early 20s, which now when I look back, when you're in the midst of just hell in your life and you're like, why is this happening to me? And then, you get older and you look back and you're like, yeah, I get what the teaching was. And I had this 7-year injury that took me away from being a professional ballet dancer, which is what I thought I was going to be doing with my life. So it was a huge kind of identity crisis, but actually super liberating, because that's when I started, I asked myself the question, who am I without the identity of being a dancer? And that's what propelled me on this path. And when I look back at those 7 years of physical pain, I really understand how it taught me to be with my experience, to be with pain, to be with struggle, to be with disappointment. Fucking hell, I was so disappointed. Like, why? Why am I being set up? Why was I given this talent? Why was I given all this external support and all these people that believed in me, only to feel like I totally failed or my body failed me, right? And for years, I hated my ankle. I hated it. And I didn't want it to be a part of my body. It was like the thing that was keeping me from my dreams. It was keeping me from my vitality. It was causing me daily pain. It was inhibiting me. It was restricting me. And then I remember, I have this distinct memory of sitting on my bed and I was like, oh, wow. I've been so mean to myself. I've been so mean to this part of my body. And it's a part of my body. I'm not going to cut it off. That would be even worse, right? But we emotionally sever ourselves from ourselves. We emotionally stuff that part of us away and go, I want to get rid of it. If I had, a nickel for every time, now with inflation, if I had a dollar, a pound, a euro for every time I've heard that, how do I get rid of this part of me? Man, I'd be rich now. There is no way, as you've heard me say. When it comes to your physical body, that becomes really clear because you wouldn't want to amputate a part of your body, would you? But living with it on you as if it's dragging behind you, as if it's a real inconvenience, that's a heavy load to carry. And that's a lot of inner conflict. My God, is that a lot of inner conflict? Like you're constantly in resistance and hate even. It can be. I really hated this part of my body. I was so angry at it. I was so disappointed. I was so resentful. I look back on it and go, wow, that was probably one of the greatest teachers of my life. Hard, bloody hard, yeah, but one of the most amazing teachers. So if you're going through a hard time now, don't underestimate the gifts that are going to come out of it at some point. At some point, you'll be able to, we tend to, what is that quote that says we live life forwards, but we understand it backwards? That's so, so true. So with a physical pain like that or a physical injury, it becomes really clear, right? The emotional part is more ambiguous, as I said. But the moment that I realized, like, wow, I've been so mean to myself, and just like, wow, I'm so sorry. I'm really so sorry. And I learned to kind of bring that in and to love it more. And then interestingly enough, there was a woman that for years I kept on running into it. She's like, you got to see this physical therapist. You got to see this physio. And I never got around to it. There's something that was blocking me. Oh, it's too expensive, this, that, and the other. There was always an excuse. And we have to kind of trust the timing of things, right? But I think I needed to understand that internally first of like, you're not going to heal if you're trying to sever this part or punish even this part of you. And the moment I embraced it and I included it and I apologized to it and I was like, oh my God, you need some love. Then all of a sudden things lined up and I remembered about that physio and I went to see him. And in 3 months, he restructured my ankle and I was fine. Right? So nothing is ever going to happen if we are severing ourselves, fragmenting ourselves and pushing parts of ourselves away. And sometimes I think this idea of looking at ourselves as a project makes us do that. It's like, oh God, I don't want to deal with that project. Let's just put it, on the desk along with a bunch of other bills and papers, But when we're coming at it as like, well, how would you treat a friend? You'd be there for them. You'd care. You'd check in on them. You'd want to give them a hug. You'd want to, we need to learn to do this with ourselves. And that is what is going to make us heal. So when I say I don't give step 1, step 2, step 3, is because it's just a state of being. What we're working on is a state of being, which then, of course, will feed into our behaviors, our belief systems, our patternings, our reactions versus responses, our triggers. It all has a ripple effect, right? It goes into all of the stuff that we might kind of, if we were doing a session together, I'd go into maybe the more nitty gritty of that. But really, the foundation of it all is, what is your relationship to yourself? How are you being with yourself? How are you being in your own presence of who you are? Is it kind or is it mean? Is it accepting or is it punishing? Is it friendly or is it a bully? Right? And again, whatever we're yearning from the external, I wanted a more loving, nurturing mother. I wanted a more protective, safe father. I wanted a more compassionate teacher. I wanted more inclusive friends. Whatever it is that might be our trigger, our wound, our trauma. Yes, it would be so lovely and amazing if they could have been resolved from those people. But that's not often the case. And so when we're adults, we can go, okay, how do I resolve that within myself? So you heal the inner mother, you heal the inner father, you heal the inner teacher, you heal the inner peers. And through all of that, this is the arc of life and being human, is you get to build a really amazing relationship with yourself. You get to know yourself and you get to know all parts of yourself. This work isn't to discover how perfect you are and that all of a sudden you're uber positive and you're enlightened and you're, super happy all the time. No, this is like looking at getting to know all the nooks and crannies of who you are and going, I love that too. I love that part too. That's what will bring you into peace. So I'm sorry if I'm not giving you step 1, step 2, step 3, but I hope you understand the gist of what I'm trying to share here, which is this isn't about, it doesn't start with doing. It starts with being. How are you being with yourself? Then your doing is going to change really quite a lot. So food for thought. I'll leave it at that today. As always, take it or leave it as feels right for you. And the journey continues. Loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.